I don't think our kids expect us to be perfect. And it actually means a lot to them to see that we're working on handling ourselves, working to be fair, to do what is best. Even if we get it dead wrong, I think they track that as an investment in them, and it means something. Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad to have you here. We are having a Facebook Live tonight on parenting resilience, and I've invited my two colleagues and friends, Kristin and Aron. Let me just tell you a little bit about, well, I'll start with Kristin because Aron's not on yet, but I met Kristin in 2011 at my first, well, maybe it was my second Schnarch training, but we were at Kripalu in Western Mass, and she and I had a conversation, and then I think we just started being roommates every time we would train with Dr. Schnarch. So Kristin and I go way back. I guess it's only been 14 years, but it feels like really like when I was kind of, it was really a good experience to train with Dr. Schnarch all those years, and really shaped my kind of thinking and technique as a clinician. So, Kristin and I caught up a few months ago, and she was telling me about the work she's been doing around parenting resilience. And I said, maybe you should just come on and answer some of the questions that have come into the Facebook group on parenting. So let me give them a formal introduction, but both Kristin and Aron will be really, I may chime in, ask clarifying questions, give some comments, but really I'm going to let them take on these questions. So Kristin is an LCPC, licensed clinical professional counselor, and she's had a private practice in Portland, Maine since 2008. And Kristin studied at the Mnuchin Center for the Family and taught structural family therapy with the Swister Training Institute. She has supervised counselor colleagues in marriage and family therapy, and she is an ASECT certified sex therapist. And then Kristin trained in the Crucible approach with Dr. David Schnarch from 2011 to 2020, and continues to train with leaders in this approach. So that's Kristin. And then Aron, who I know will be joining us, but is having a little trouble getting on. But Aron Carlson is a licensed clinical social worker and has practiced psychotherapy for 18 years. He's worked in the Washington, D.C. area with children and their parents since 2013. And is a Maryland board-approved supervisor for new clinicians pursuing state licensure. Aron trained in the Crucible approach with Dr. David Schnarch from 2018 to 2020, and he also continues to train with leaders in the approach. So welcome, Kristin and Aron, when Aron gets here. But Kristin, why don't you just jump in and take it away?
Sure. Thank you for that introduction. And it is sweet to be together again. And we did indeed, I think our first big deep dive with Dr. Schnarch was in Northwestern Massachusetts. I think that my experience of him was, wow, I've never seen a brain like this, and a human being who had so much capacity to make real contact. And as parents, I think that's one of the big things that it is something probably that we all strive for, to really make contact with our children. But my goodness, it is definitely a challenge with all of the things that we're up against. I would certainly also just share, I'm a mom of, my daughter's 22. And I think that some of the most difficult moments as a parent have also been some of the most profound moments. And I often say to my clients, there's nothing wrong. It's a natural system. And there's something really relieving if we can think about the fact that these brains are so impacted by the brains of our parents. And we have varying degrees of awareness in terms of how that is impacting us in any given moment, and how that affects the ways in which we relate with our children and also with our co-parenting partners. So in terms of this evening, Aron and I are delighted to be here with you. The questions that your audience have submitted are terrific. There's some really great questions. And we selected a handful that will afford us an opportunity just to kind of get a bit into some of the concepts that we'll be introducing, and then really doing a bit more of a deep dive at our 2-day online workshop, which we'll talk more about at the end. But I guess I'll just continue, since Aron's not on yet. if we think about the term parent resilience, what does that actually even mean? We like to think about it in terms of how a parent responds when the limits of our brain function and our capacity to regulate our own feelings and really organize our thoughts has been reached or exceeded. So it's when we're above our window of tolerance. And there are often a lot of internal feelings and sensations, thoughts, and meaning that parents experience suddenly and repeatedly that have a lot of patterns. And they can actually be internally identified. So a parent who can identify more often than not that their mind and brain are playing out a reactionary pattern, the ability to do that is part of what we think about when we speak of parent resilience. We emphasize what's happening in your mind as a parent, not to excuse or diminish what's happening in your child's or your co-parent's behavior or minds, but because we know that your own mind, your brain is where you have the best shot of impacting yourself positively. And because your family is an ecological system, you also be able to impact your loved ones by extension. David Snarsh used to say, the most loving act is to be able to really get a handle on ourselves. It's about managing ourselves, but we have to be able to take a third view of ourselves. So if we think about what happens in a parent's mind and functioning that will contribute to dysfunctional interactional patterns and dynamics, it's a pretty hard question to consider in general, and particularly when we're under stress and pressure with meaningful and emotionally charged interactions. So at times, a common perspective is to think, my child's the problem, or my co-parenting partner, not as flexible, so authoritative, or my child is being disrespectful. And I think a lot of times when we're approaching interaction in this way, the only target for action is trying to get the other person to change. And we're not well positioned to be able to really get a handle on ourselves. So when we're in that state of mind, we're likely to say and do things as a parent that might pressure or collude with our child or our co-parenting partner to try to change them to interact in the direction that we want, which usually increases the chances that they're going to respond similarly to us. So this often contributes to interactional patterns that typically escalate, they go nowhere, they recur, or they leave us just feeling pretty crummy about ourselves.
Kristin, do you mind if I just kind of recap that just to make sure I'm following everything you're saying before you say more? So, yeah, I think what you're saying is when we're interacting and a child is maybe not doing what we want, or they're struggling in some way, they're dysregulated, that we may very instinctively just play out our own pattern in response to their dysregulation. Or, our own dysregulation is happening and we're playing out in a patterned way. And our power is in recognizing those patterns and being able to not just enact them, but to alter them by our self-awareness. And I think what you're also saying is, rather than being self-aware, which is hard to do, especially when you're regressed, we tend to be aware of what our partner's doing incorrectly or badly, or what our child's doing badly. But in that sort of externalizing, we tend to then just keep playing out our enmeshed or reactive pattern. Am I capturing everything that you just said?
Precisely. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think just kind of making sure I'm with you and kind of helping people maybe to hear it one more time so that they're also staying right with you. But yeah, but yes, I do agree with everything you're saying, as in, I know this in my own life. I know this very much in just how we are as humans. Yeah.
And I think that it's really possible for parents to learn to better identify internal experiences, thoughts, feelings that are connected with a perspective like, my kid or my co-parenting partner is the biggest problem here. and to see this as an indicator of our current limits of resilience. It's a really, to be able to actually track ourselves is no small thing. I think it's one of the hardest things, particularly when we're interacting and around things that crank up our anxiety, or we're pressured, our family members are interacting with us, or there are implications for the way that our child is functioning in their broader world. On the bright side, family relationships offer endless natural opportunities for us to encounter the limits of our resilience, whether we want them to or not. And these encounters can really be used to develop our resilience and, in turn, that of our children. I don't think that this endeavor is supposed to be easy. It's not easy. And on some level, I think it's really useful. Like I say this to myself a lot. It's a natural system. There's nothing wrong here. To be able to see what's actually happening is really good news. And I've seen a lot of parents who have accurate insight into their children's minds, but that still have difficulty organizing themselves during interactions, and can consequently end up arguing with their kids over how long it takes to drive to soccer practice, while part of them believes that the issue for their child is more likely that they actually don't want to go and are trying not to. So as we know, your audience, I think, is probably quite familiar with some of the ideas of differentiation, which is the ability to be flexible includes quieting our brain down and being able to soothe and calm ourselves. And our thinking is that a parent's level of resilience really depends on their level of differentiation, as well as frequency and depth of regression with respect to brain function. We'll talk a little bit about a regression in a bit as it relates to a couple of the different questions that the audience submitted to us. So the limit of a parent's resilience can be held in place by specific issues in either or, and often both, of these other areas that we've talked about. So I guess just in closing, in terms of parent resilience, it can best be described as a parent's ability to really quiet their mind and really calm their heart and soothe themselves in the face of interactions with their children and/or co-parenting partner, which create frustration, anxiety, stress, or dissonance. And to the extent that parents are able to self-regulate, it increases their capacity to think clearly. And it's really being able to take that third view as observer and to be able to recognize our thinking is not particularly reliable, that lends to us being able to have flexibility in the way that we respond to situations. Having the ability, to really self-soothe is what affords us the opportunity to be able to reflect on why we're getting triggered, personally triggered, so that we're better able to accurately see what might be underneath our children's misbehavior. And then from there, when we're able to see ourselves more accurately, our kids and co-parenting partner are likely to be surprised that we can identify ways in which our thinking is off and to address it on our own, which really sets the stage for a more resilient, collaborative interaction. I'm noticing questions popping up. Should we speak into those questions?
I think the theme that has just come in, and I'm sure you're going to get to this, is how do we do that? How do we self-regulate when our child is dysregulated, when we're dysregulated, when it's an intense moment? I fully identify with what you're saying about how we get dumber, the more regressed we get. Like, I know
That's right.
sometimes my daughters ask me, why are you responding that way? Like, do you think that's actually helpful? And then I'm thinking about, okay, that's clearly very unhelpful, but I couldn't keep track of that in the moment because my regress brain was just trying to control something or make her think a different way, as if that's going to work. But in the moment, it's very hard to track that you're regressed and then to know how to stop being regressed when there's so much happening. So anyway, that's the theme of the questions, is how do we do it?
It's funny. We were in a, Crucible training group. And one of our mentors It was everybody was sort of impacted by some things that were happening more broadly. And our mentor stopped all of us and she said, guys, I want you to take a moment and I want you to get in your bodies. So it was, watching the Brady Bunch and people were like literally bouncing in their chairs or swinging arms. What is this all about? It's getting in our bodies, feeling my feet on the ground underneath my feet. Sometimes I do a stretching of my hands. When we're doing telemedicine, we can get away with bloody murder because our clients can't see what we're up to. But, bilateral stimulation happening each side of the exterior of my leg. These are all ways to try to get out of our head and into our body. Movement is really the anecdote, getting embodied. I have an increasing number of my clients who literally, if they're getting regressed, they'll get up and walk. So getting embodied. Good evening, Aron. So happy that you were able to.
I was waiting to see when I should try to say something to see if you knew.
Well, Aron, I bet this has been an exercise in self-regulation. Trying
to. I have the perfect anecdote if I haven't missed my opportunity.
You certainly have not.
Well, I can jump right into that if that would be appropriate.
Yeah.
I had a really hard time joining this call, and I tried everything I could think of, and I was getting more anxious and warmer. And finally, before I found a solution, I started to calm down a little bit. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to do that before I joined the call. And I want to use that as an example of what we mean by resilience in terms of how quickly and thoroughly a person's ability to regulate their feelings and order their thoughts can be recovered once your limit on regulating those things is exceeded. And this was a comparatively low stakes thing as opposed to a family emergency. But it was enough to throw me off and get my body tense and have harder time typing and stuff like that. And I'm glad it worked out. And I'm glad that I got calmer before I joined. But you never know.
So I'm thinking it might be prudent for us to kind of shift focus to some of the questions that viewers submitted. Would that be appropriate?
I think that would be really helpful to make it concrete for people.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start with one of the questions that was submitted by one of your viewers. And it reads, I'm pretty resilient in my parenting as I've figured out a lot in the last 18 years with 6 kids. And I've taken all JFF's courses and they changed my life for the best. My 16-year-old son is a strong personality with a lot of admirable strengths. And I actually don't worry about him as an adult someday. But right now, he projects his stress onto the family, kind of like a microwave with the door open. I do my best to stand secure in myself, and I'm always working on letting him know that I will not be treated badly. It's sometimes hard for me to find the words in the moment of his stress to remind him he cannot take it out on me. I am not his doormat. I remind him we are on the same team. It's hard to parent him in the hard moments and then be fun and playful in the stress-free times. But most everything feels stressful for him and less playful than it used to be. He's finding his way and doesn't want help, but he still needs mother, and I'm not giving up on him. I do not nag. I don't take his behavior personally. It's just a lot to handle, and I have to leave the room sometimes because more talking does not help. His nervous system seems stuck in fight or flight. How do you help a kid get out of his own way and confront himself when he has no desire to do so, but that's what he needs? I think the answer is to just wait and stay firm and kind while his brain finishes developing. I love the way Jennifer articulates her thoughts, so I'm curious to hear her thoughts. Thank you for the language and dialogue you've given the world. Well, I'm going to answer, and Jennifer, feel free to add whatever you like. But I think you use the term regression. I don't know how many of our viewers are familiar with the term, but Dr. Snarch used the metaphor of the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean. It's in the Pacific Ocean off of Guam. And it's 7 miles deep. So if you were to take Everest and plunk it to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, it would be entirely submerged. And there is life at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, but as you can imagine, the weight and the pressure of all of that water really has had impact, and the creatures have had to adapt. So after you guys get off this show, I want you to Google an image of an anglerfish. You could do it right now, because that's what you look like when you're acutely regressed. Ugly and nasty. And when we're regressed, the bottom line, we think our welfare is on the line. So we actually, and as is the case at in the Mariana Trench, there are no schools of fish. They're all predatorial. So kill or be killed. So acute regression is a short-term or temporary reduction in our ability to think straight and manage our emotions due to a shift in brain function. As you said, we get dumber. The more regressed we are, our cognitive functioning is really quite poor. In popular terms, a regression is when we lose it or we have a tantrum, and our emotional reactivity increases dramatically. We're very susceptible to our emotions when we're regressed. The accuracy of our thoughts and perceptions really diminishes. And frankly, our deductive logic evaporates. So when we're regressed, we're really susceptible to think that our welfare is being threatened. For this parent, I think it's probably likely that the idea her son's not receptive is threatening to her. And for this son, he likely thinks that his autonomy is under siege. This said, the parent's 16-year-old is likely regressed when he projects his stress onto the family, and the mom's brain state is also impacted by virtue of the fact that she's said that it's sometimes hard for her to find her words. So being able to really track our brain state is vitally important, particularly if you think about it, because regression is more contagious than COVID. Meaning, if your child is regressed, chances are you are as well. So that's a really important piece for us to think about. How to recognize when we're regressed? Well, first of all, we have to be able to recognize that our thinking is not reliable when we're underwater. And the brain loves pattern recognition. So I know for myself, for example, I think about my 21-year-old last summer. When I came home from work, I was really fatigued. I walk in the house and the sink is full of dishes. I put something in the trash. There is compost in the trash. There are recyclables in the trash. And in that moment, I was clearly thinking, she's being so disrespectful. She's such a hypocrite. She was the climate strike chair in high school. And here she's throwing the composting in the trash. Whatever happened to her concern for the environment? And I realized, Kristin, your thinking is really problematic if you're taking personally the fact that she perhaps likely inadvertently in a rush put the composting in the trash. So just an example that to be able to really track if we're taking things personally, it's likely we're regressed. And so to be able to really question our minds by considering the meaning that we're making, such as he's being disrespectful, he's taking his anger out on the whole family. The other piece would be to track our physiology. I myself got an Apple Watch explicitly so I could start to really get dialed into my heart rate variability. So I know when my heart rate changes, if I have an increase in my body temperature, if my thoughts start to race, I generally might have an excitability feeling in my chest. These are all telltale signs of what's happening physiologically, which is a function of our brain state. And then to really be able to soothe ourselves. Again, I talk a lot about bilateral stimulation. For some people, tapping. Or for some people, it's having a spiritual object, which I always have on the ready when I'm working at my desk, just so I can get out of my head and in my body. I think lastly, as adults, self-confrontation is very, very difficult, despite the fact that we do have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. So that said, self-confrontation is even more challenging for children and teens, particularly in the face of short-term acute regression. So I think it would be important for this parent to consider what's coming up for me, given I'm thinking that my only options are to intervene or step back altogether. What is arising for me if and when I work to disengage when I see that my son's regressed? Are there concerns I have about how my son is impacting other family members? And are there issues from this parent's family of origin, which may be impacting the way that they're seeing and interpreting their son's behavior? And then from there, to what degree is this creating anxiety, and how might the parent better self regulate? The son is more likely to reflect on his behavior and relational impact when it's on his terms, as opposed to doing so under duress. And this parent's capacity to self regulate and to really hold pro social empathy when they see that the son has regressed is what's going to lend most to the son being able to self regulate.
Yeah, and just to kind of echo, I think what you're saying there, I think that the way that she wrote this question, I think she's on the right track. I mean, I think like she's saying, I recognize I'm losing it. I recognize I'm having a hard time because he is struggling so much. And of course, lots of teenagers struggle, but some can have neurological challenges, other reasons why they may struggle even more, right? And so I think what you're saying, Kristin, and just correct me if you would say it any differently, is that it in fact is quite helpful for her to just focus on her self-regulation, even if she doesn't know what to do, right? Even if, like, of course, all the self-confrontation, the self-awareness, knowing your family of origin, is there something about the way this child is reacting that's triggering me more than I realize? But that it is immensely helpful to self-regulate in and of itself, even if you don't know really what to do beyond handling your own reactivity, right? Is that fair? Is that what you would say?
Unequivocally,
Meaning, yes, okay. Yeah, because he may well, in knowing that, as you said, she would have more pro-social empathy. She'd be more able to respond in a wise way if she's not regressed. And it gives him the structure and the mind to reference in her that's most likely to help him. Of course, it's not a guarantee. Everybody has their own, responsibility for who they're going to be and how they're going to handle the body and mind that they're in. But I think it actually can help a lot, because I know for me as a parent, a lot of times I'd get into like, how do I solve it? What is it they need? What do I need to do? And those questions matter, but I think there was some relief when it occurred to me in the thick of parenting teenagers that a lot of the battle is just handling what I don't have control over and settling my own mind, because then I'm more of a resource for a process that is theirs, not really mine. And it doesn't mean I'm detached. I'm actually more able to be connected because I wasn't taking everything personally in so much reaction. I mean, not to suggest I did any of this perfectly or that I would remember and then forget 2 seconds later. So it's clearly an ongoing process. But there's relief in letting go of the idea that there's a strategy I must nail down so that they're okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that, for me also as a parent, when I would get into these interactions where I notice, I have this agenda, it creates a lot more anxiety for the way in which I'm thinking about the interaction. It doesn't lend to, speaking of resilience, the idea that it's not really our job to protect our children from themselves. And some of the experiences that they're going to have are going to be really meaningful, far more than what we could try to teach and impart. So to your point, absolutely. I think that there's something quite powerful for our children as well, because when they're mapping that we're really working to manage ourselves, it affords at least some capacity for there to be a different kind of interaction if our angst is not in the mix.
All right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'd like to add that one of the really difficult things about being reactionary or regressed is knowing that it's happening to you when it's happening to you. And to piggyback off the example that Jennifer shared, it's been my experiences working with parents that when they are identifying that they're trying to provide solutions for their kid, is usually how it looks from the inside view. Their mind is already organized toward trying to regulate their own anxiety and is taking a position of trying to save or often rescue. And this can happen in a nanosecond. And that can be used as an example, as a way that parents can track their internal thought process, which is part of what's going on in this whole experience is,
Yes.
how am I seeing things and what kind of thinking am I doing right now? But almost always, when you're in a frame of mind of, I'm going to sort this out for both of us or for my kid, you're already
Regressed.
if it's happening. And it's hard to see it.
Yeah, especially in that frame, Aron, because it's like, no, I'm trying to solve it. I'm trying
That's
to get
right.
them to think the right thing
It's
so they don't have to suffer in this way. And
Right.
really, you're really managing your own anxiety in that
Yeah.
moment. Yeah.
So it gets hard for the parent to separate their own internal feelings and perspectives and wants from their best judgment about what their kid needs, separate from how they're feeling. And when that gets lost, your judgment is going to be temporarily impaired. And some of the good news is, I think, is that's okay, because most decisions can wait until people have calmed down and had another look at it when they're a little bit more sober, and be made under those terms instead of in the heat of the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that can help a lot, to just try to not move into action, to give our brain and soul a moment. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't have to make a decision right now. Maybe I don't have to decide just yet.
Yeah.
Maybe that can wait.
The other piece I would just add before perhaps move on to another question is that, to the extent that we are pacing and taking time, it has impact. Your interoceptic cue is my experience of you and what I can sense of you. So the other piece to think about is that we parents are really working to self-regulate. It does not get lost on our children. Not that we're doing it for the sake of trying to co-regulate our children, to be clear, but to the extent that we are really working to get settled, and taking that bait, such as what you just spoken to from your last participant, it really makes a big difference.
100%. I don't think our kids expect us to be perfect, and it actually means a lot to them to see that we're working on handling ourselves, working to be fair, to do what is best. Even if we get it dead wrong, I think they track that as an investment in them, and it means something. So
Definitely. I remember at one of the later workshops with Dr. Schnarch, he said something to the effect, I bet you would all love to know the secret to parenting. And those of us who are infamous note takers, I think two of us were in the group, we were, always with pen in hand. It's not that you're not going to mess it up. It's your capacity to see your relational impact and to really speak into that so you can do meaningful repair. So again, take heart. It's not that we're not going to mess it up. It's our capacity to take that third view and to really see the way in which we're impacting our co-parenting partner or our child, and to address that.
before you guys move on to the next, can I just articulate what somebody wrote here? I wonder the difference between mind masking with our kids versus trying to be a regulated adult. I want to show my children my solid sense of self, and I also don't want to hide from them. I just think it's a great question.
That's a great
Because-
question.
Right.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that?
I got some. Mind masking, the way I understand it, is something that people learn without trying very hard when they're anxious and may not be aware that they're anxious, and often when they're a kid, to shield their mind from being more accurately seen by a parent or another family member or sibling or something. And so your brain learns as a kind of survival strategy to not show what's going on. And this is not something anybody plans to do. It's part of our kind of natural capacity to survive as human beings. And so you can be a regulated adult who mind masks. I think some of the things to consider about this are, if you're mind masking, it can be hard to identify it for yourself. And if you there are usually important and legitimate reasons for why you're doing that. And you might be able to get closer to it by tracking your anxiety as best you can in many of the ways that have been mentioned already on this call. But I think therapy is a good help for this with a therapist who is hip to mind masking to get some accurate reflection.
I would also add, it's not, I mean, first and foremost, as you know, our capacity to really settle ourselves is probably the most important piece. But even when I'm settled, I know in the context of parenting, there are definitely times where it's appropriate for me to not reveal certain things that I'm thinking
Sure.
about my daughter. So to think about if in the service of what? In the service of what am I choosing to mask my thoughts and not reveal what I'm thinking? I think
Yeah.
that's a question.
What's the goal? Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. And what is is this coming from a solid place in me? Is it coming from the best in me? It might be appropriate if I'm thinking, she really did a terrible job on that essay that she just asked me to critique. But I think it's most appropriate for her, she's got to be responsible. She's worked on this project, and I don't think it's really appropriate for me to weigh in. That would be coming from a solid place in me. So, I think to your point, Aaron, these are things we certainly can address and, therapeutically, but also there are appropriate times when shielding our thoughts are appropriate.
Yeah.
And I like your point of just asking ourselves the question, what is it serving, right? Is it about that person? Is it about that it's not information that serves them or that they need? We don't always know the answers to these, but at least thinking about the motivational thing. I would just add one other idea is that I've sometimes mistaken self-regulation with self-suppression. And what I mean is I'm being kind of stoic or rigid and calling it self-regulation when in fact it's more about trying to manage, stay almost hyper controlled and it's dysregulated.
Mhm.
And my kids would track it like that.
Mhm.
And I wasn't tracking it as dysregulated. Yeah.
Absolutely. I hear regularly from parents I work with, they emphasize that I was speaking in a calm voice. And I'm like, I bet you were. However, we spoke that
Yesterday.
you're having the same internal process, but it may be coming through a calm voice, and your kid is probably picking up on some of what you're thinking based on what they've seen before.
Right.
So it's good that your voice is calmer, but there's more going on here.
Right.
Okay. I'll move to the next question then. My wife and I have 5 girls and 1 boy in the middle of the pack. Only one is still in high school. Oldest is 26, and the youngest is almost 15. 2 are twins and are both married and have a young boy with their husbands. I am in the midst of choosing a divorce that I never wanted or hoped for, and I hope for the divorce to be amicable. After 29 years of marriage, it's clear that my wife and I have very different parenting ideas and ways of seeing life. I am more the discipline and rule enforcer, firm but with love, and she's the whatever they want as long as they just love me parent. We will be splitting custody of our youngest, and I'm looking for some help in how to teach resilience as a single parent to a 15-year-old daughter when there will be different parenting styles when she's at my place versus my wife's place. Also, any help with supporting older children launching in life and making decisions and choices about career, love, and life. My goal is to teach them resilience and let them make their choices and learn for themselves. I don't want to get in the way or burden them with thinking they have to do what I say to receive my love. Okay, so co-parenting is typically challenging, and particularly when a marriage is dissolving. And I think that this father is aware of that and is also aware that being able to work collaboratively with his wife through this process will be very difficult. And I think that can be difficult for the daughter that he's included in this question. I think it's important for this father to consider that his parental identity and resilience is likely to be challenged to some degree by his impending divorce, which could include becoming a single parent for the first time. This would be an important adjustment for anybody experiencing it. And I think considering that that would be normal could be useful, especially if it doesn't feel that way. To talk a little bit about the difference in parenting perspectives that this father is identifying, I think the way that this father regulates himself and how he sees his relationship with his 15-year-old daughter are far more likely to impact his daughter's developing capacity for resilience in his relationship with her than her other parents' parenting style. So his relationship with his daughter, there's room for it to function differently than her relationship with her mother. And he's impacting her resilience by how he functions when she's with him, his daughter is with him. And that's where he can impact her and impact him. And that is not typically something that is lost to how another parent parents differently. So along similar lines, I work with many parents who want to teach their children specific things. And I think it's useful to consider that irrespective of what you want to teach your child, which is usually a value, a skill, or an idea, the way in which you are interacting and functioning with them is more what shapes their development in general and their resilience in particular. Because your child is going to be interpreting what is important to you and what you believe from their own point of view, which is a different basis than what you think you're telling them. So kind of in line with what we've been saying so far. Resilience is more of a capacity development that comes out of interactions with parents and family members. And that's a very different thing than how we can think about it conceptually and talk about it that way.
So Aron, do you mind if I just recap that to make sure I'm tracking what you're saying?
Please.
You're saying that in some sense, it makes sense that he's anxious about the impact that his soon-to-be ex-wife will have on the daughter's resilience. He can't control how she parents, how she thinks about it. And I think what you're saying is rather than maybe concern yourself too much with what other experiences she's going to have from her other parent, that to not underestimate the value of having positive interactions based in his ability to self-regulate and to handle himself. That it's not so much about a theoretical thing of the correct approach or not correct approach, but more about him handling himself in his interactions with her will be good for her brain, good for her development, and help her deal with what other situations she may encounter.
That's right. I worked with a client whose relationships with all adult children were in bad shape as the marriage was coming to an end. And after the divorce was finalized and the father that I was working with developed more capacity and insight into how to interact with his kids, all of those relationships have improved greatly in ways that surprised him, which I think shows that his kids' level of resilience has increased, probably in general, but specifically when they're with him. And that stays with the kids no matter who they're staying with. And that can be accomplished irrespective of how the other parent is functioning.
And I would say that this also applies for people in the same household. I think there's a lot of anxiety that arises when one parent thinks that the way in which the other parent is functioning is really problematic. So I think we could also extend what it is that you're speaking into to couples who are together.
Right.
Shall we move on to another question from our audience? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have a child who is very private and quiet. He's always been like this ever since he was a small child. He is now a teenager, 14, and the privateness can feel secretive or, in the very least, untrustworthy. I tried to explain to him that if I don't know the things going on in his head and life, I have a hard time trusting him and giving him more privileges. The only way I ever get information is when he is around friends and they start talking. He also becomes more interactive around me when he is around them, which is the only thing that gives me hope. Should I stop trying to change his personality and just love him for who he is? Or is it important to keep pushing him out of his comfort zone and talk about his emotions, feelings, and important things? Because he's so quiet and it feels like we have no connection, I will bend over backwards to make him feel loved and cared for. My sisters and husband joke around and say he is, quote, my golden child, quote. But in a lot of ways, I would just do anything to have him open up to me and share his life. Incidentally, none of my other 3 children are like this, which is reassuring in some ways because I have hope it means I haven't caused this problem. So when I think about this question, I wonder, to what degree is this uh, mother anxious about her son's way of relating, insofar as she's feeling impacted based on her experience and subsequent expectations with her other 3 children? Because she does stipulate that the other 3 children are very engaging. It's very pleasing to her. While it's understandable that she'd prefer that this 14-year-old was more forthcoming, it may well be that her son is mapping his mother's anxiety. It would be meaningful for her to work to track and manage her anxiety, work to really self-soothe when she feels that her son's lack of engagement is a function of something he has done wrong, and to read and track or map her son's more subtle ways of relating. I often hear clients say, what do I need to say to get my kid to open up? Well, wait a minute. If you can settle and watch your child, you're going to glean so much information just by observing and mapping your child. So it's a whole other level of communication. It's mind mapping. It's subtle. The other piece that I would like to speak into is if we consider complementarity. To the extent that mother is insistent that son shares more, son shares less. To the extent that son shares less, mother gets anxious and perhaps more persistent about wanting him to share. The mother might consider that, again, managing her anxiety so that she's creating increased opportunity for her son to approach her. This son is likely very aware his mom will resort to pressuring him to be more open and available, i.e., I need more access to what's going on in your head if you expect to have more privileges. And his interactions with mother are likely shaped by this. So making all of this explicitly talkable for the mother to be able to speak into, honey, I surmise that my pressuring you to talk to me more is probably making me a person whom you want to talk less to. This would be a way for her to become a bit more collaborative in her parenting. I think the other piece is that it's developmentally appropriate for pre-adolescents and teens to move away from parents and toward peers. So if we consider that the primary developmental task of adolescence is to be able to develop a separate sense of self from the parents or family of origin, it's actually healthy. And another way, to consider the son's behavior is that he's able to make his own choices on his own accord, i.e., I'm not like my sibling in that I don't choose to share stuff with my parents. I prefer to share stuff with my friends. So again, this is all to say nothing's wrong. There's nothing wrong. And I do find this sentiment very heartening.
Yeah. In the question, did it say, was he a middle child, oldest child? Did it say that? Maybe not. I was just kind of curious about.
She doesn't say,
doesn't say.
She doesn't stipulate where he falls.
Yeah. Yeah. But I absolutely think I don't need to reiterate. I think you've said it all, but I just think it's developmentally appropriate to want to disengage a bit. He may also be on the more introverted side. Clearly, he has things he's willing to say when his friends are around. But yes, if he thinks mom is always trying to get access, it's going to make him want to share less. If she's regulated and present, it's more likely that things would be forthcoming. But yeah, that disentangling is always a little uncomfortable, I think, for both parties. Yeah.
So if we do one more, Aron, do you want to, what are your thoughts?
I'd love to do one more.
Okay.
I got it teed up.
All right.
Hey, Jennifer, before you move on, someone asked in the comments, would birth order have changed your answer?
Oh, it might have just helped me think a little bit more about what was happening. Not a lot, but more, was this the first adolescent this mother is kind of interacting with and not recognizing the normalcy of turning more internal and disengaging?
Yeah.
Also, is it a boy and she has girls that are older? I just wanted to know a little more
Mhm.
about the context for her concern about it. But I don't know that it changes the answer much, right?
Mhm.
Gotcha.
Yeah, those are important details. This question says, I have a son who was diagnosed with rapid cycling bipolar just before turning 18. He is refusing to take any medication for his condition, has essentially failed out of college, and is struggling to keep a fast food job while living at home. He is trying to cope with his emotions through gaming. How would a differentiated parent respond to this situation? How do I decide what are reasonable expectations for him, given he has bipolar disorder? I don't want to enable him, and yet I know his condition makes normal functioning more difficult. So one of the thoughts that I had reading this is I wonder how symptomatic the son is on a regular basis in this situation, because I think that that could have diagnostic implications, as well as if the more symptomatic the kid is, the higher the stakes may be about having to do something. So I suspect that the parent is well-founded in their concerns, especially if the son is currently symptomatic. And the symptoms for rapid cycling bipolar tend to be pretty impairing. To get to the differentiation question a bit, one important and I think universal basis for parent decision-making is the parent's best judgment about what the kid needs, separately considered from the parent's own feelings and experiences. And then this is a common hurdle in becoming more differentiated as a parent and developing more resilience. And in this case, there may be some pretty high stakes. So learning more about bipolar may be useful and worthwhile, but that's a separate issue than what the parent is likely to experience in approaching their son internally and externally about concerns that they have. And I'd be curious to know more about how what this parent sees their son at risk for, given what happens in their home on a day-to-day basis. I suspect that the parent has thought about why their son may refuse to take medicine that could mitigate at least some of his symptoms. And if the son is currently refusing to visit with a prescriber, I wonder if the parents thought about that. So if the parent sees this son as more impaired due to the course of the diagnosis, or somewhat impaired by the diagnosis, but also kind of avoiding dealing with it, the way that you'd approach your kid would be different. In the case that the kid looks like his functioning has been deteriorating and is going to work less, more gaming, and overall less regulated, sleep may be dysregulated, then it's possible that there's a neurobiological component that would have to be addressed as a likely next step in order to try to help this kid's functioning come up before the kid can hold more agency for himself about it. And that can be a difficult thing for a parent to do. But I see the possibility of that there.
So depending on how impaired the child is, I mean, they're 18, so they're an adult, but you're saying depending on how impaired they are and what the actual risks are going to, of course, shape the parent's response. But I don't know, maybe say a little bit
Okay.
more.
The point I'm trying to make is that the parent's likely to have a view of the son's course, given what he's what the parent has observed, and there could be the kid could be so impaired by bipolar symptoms that he's not able to organize himself to help himself out.
Mm-hmm.
And the parent was in a position to see that to some degree. It's not clear to me from the question where that's at, but that's a possibility I wanted to mention, especially in case that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've had cases with clients who have had bipolar disorder, and when their functioning is down, which often correlates with them being off their medicine, but not always, it's really hard for them to organize themselves and get some traction with how they're doing. And they need often some medication as a next step. And that can be tricky for a parent, particularly if they're not comfortable with how they think the kid's going to react and what it means to them, the parent that is, to propose medication and so on.
Well, and I can't think of a situation that would demand more self-regulation of a parent than that kind of moment, because the stakes are very, very high, and yet you don't have control, even though it matters so much. And so the anxiety in the parent, and then the mismatch of the child or the adult child that's impaired enough that they can't necessarily respond to their situation is very, very challenging. And yet sometimes the most we still have control over at that point, I had a child who was really depressed during COVID. He was a minor still, but I wasn't going to be able to force him into, that is to say, he still had to make a choice that he needed help, and yet was so challenged in the moment that he had no hope. He was, and so I can relate to this question in the sense that the stakes are very, very high, and being able to handle yourself while tolerating what you can't control is not easy stuff.
Absolutely.
But I do think, just to kind of emphasize what the point I think the two of you have been making, is that, just to map, I mean, my son said to me since, that it really helped me to feel you and Dad's investment, like just to feel that you cared about what was going on, because even though I felt so little clarity that anything could help me, like to just track your presence and your I mean, he didn't say regulation, but I think that's what he meant, is that we were on it. We weren't trying to control it because we couldn't control it. I mean, we were getting help, in thinking about how to approach him around it. But, that is powerful, to just to love your child and to handle what isn't yours to control while staying present and involved. And doesn't mean that it always goes the way. I mean, thank goodness he had the courage to step up and say, okay, I'll receive help. I'll get some help. But there was no guarantee on that, I mean, and so it's hard, really, really hard, but not dismissing the power we have in just handling our own minds.
Yes. And I think the other piece that, the feedback that you got from your son was the meaning around being able to actually make contact. Making contact is really profound. I think, for, I'm sure the three of us would agree that as clinicians, that a lot of what we see, people, a lot of traumatic mind mapping comes from people not having had experiences in family of origin where they were being seen and having, presence, like attunement. So being able to make contact is not for nothing. And that's really
for sure
what your son was speaking about. That he needed your presence and your capacity to be real and make contact.
Yes, exactly. So do you guys want to tell people about your seminar and, where they can find you and so on? Yeah.
Sure. So Aron and I will be doing a 2-day training. It's a virtual training, and it's on Saturday, November 8th and Sunday, November 9th. from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can go to the International Crucible Therapy Education Center, ICTAC. I believe that Christy
got-
will. Oh, there it is. So she has just included the website. So if you click on that website and you go onto into the section on training, you'll see we're actually offering an early bird rate. It's $375 per person or $675 per couple if you register.
For October 3rd.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. But you, as well, our contact information is there, and I would also just add that if folks have questions and would like to get a little bit more of a sense about what we'll be offering, you're certainly welcome to reach out. On that website, you will see that we kind of walk through the objectives, and we're trying to really deliver the material in the way that Dr. Snursh did with us, which is really right brain, more experiential, more interactive. So it's not going to be, we're just throwing a bunch of concepts at you. It'll really be a very engaging experience. So we would love to have folks join us. It'll be, it's a privilege to be here, Jennifer. It's been really a blast to be together with you this evening.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it too. I miss you guys. I haven't seen you in a while.
Oh,
You know,
no.
like seen you.
Well, it was like putting on a comfortable pair of shoes to get into this conversation with both of you. So it's been a blast for me.
Well, good. So people can read more about it. They can contact you if they have more questions. And can you just say this? Do you have any idea like what the size of the group will be? Like, is it how interactive will it be for people if they have questions about their own situation and that kind of thing?
We've capped it at 25 participants, and there will be lots of opportunities to
Yeah, that's great.
ask questions, but we're also going to ask the participants to share what they're comfortable sharing with on specific topics related to how they see interactions with their kids and what their experiences with their own parents were like.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. That's a nice size for being able to interact and ask questions specific to your situation. So that's great. Okay, well, Kristin and Aron, thank you so much for being here. And I hope I see you again soon in person.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.